Good thing I said that. No. Thanks for doing this, Lucy.
It was fun. I mean, well, I'll let you see it, see what you think. I kind of changed it around a little.
I think it would be wonderful.
So it'll be, I actually watched the video from last year and I realized first it was really dark in my room. And second, I think I said the word a million times. So I like, oh man, I hope I don't say that this time.
You never realize it until you see it or hear it that you're saying it.
And I rarely rewatch things like that that are recorded, but I wanted to get what their questions were.
Yeah.
So I was focused on what were the questions that came up.
Yep.
So I we'll see. It'll be good.
Did I Lucy in this year? I haven't figured out the spread yet. Might be good. $44. We're letting him in, Lucy.
Perfect.
Welcome, everybody. We will give it a couple of minutes for folks to join us, and then we'll get started with our parliamentarian review. Feel free to turn cameras on if anybody wants to make it feel less like a virtual meeting. No pressure though. Welcome, folks. We're going to give it until probably 3 after, and then we'll get started. Yeah, that's valid. Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it 1 more minute, then we'll get going. Yeah. All right, let's get started, everybody. Welcome to our parliamentarian review. Our parliamentarian is Lucy Johnson. You can see her on the screen. She's right next to me on my screen, but maybe not for you. We are very fortunate to have worked with Lucy for the past several delegate assemblies. She helped us both virtually and in person now. So she is a great resource for us during delegate assembly. So I'm going to turn it over to her shortly to run through our proposed standing rules and Robert's rules also. Before we do that though, some quick housekeeping. This meeting is being recorded and we will make a copy available on the DA webpage on our MAPE website tomorrow. Everyone is muted. You can chat in questions at any time, and we will either answer as they come in if they are important to stop the presentation, or Lucy will also make time for questions at the end. So if you are a returning delegate this year, as we review the standing rules today, you'll notice that they're a bit different from the years past. The goal of our delegate assembly is to continually improve our union. And I wanted to be sure that first and forefront in our minds is that process as we make these decisions together at DA. So we are trying to simplify our process specifically for resolutions without stifling debate or discussion. So in order to do that, there's 3 paths that each resolution can take after the discussion. Lucy's going to go over that for us, but as the highest governing body in MAPE, we felt that it was important to keep our focus on the merits of what the resolution intends to do, and not necessarily on the minutia or the more minor details, think grammar or specific dollar amounts. So our time in discussion can be more productive debating why we like or why we don't like what that resolution intends to do, rather than wordsmithing as a large group. So Lucy's going to go over a lot of that for us today. I just kind of wanted to set the stage because you'll notice, again, if you're a returning delegate, that some things are different this year. So soak it all in at first as Lucy goes over it, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. At this point, Lucy, I will hand it over to you, and thank you again for being here this year to help us out.
Thank you, Megan. It's fun to be with you, and I hope that we have a great hour together. So today what I'm going to talk about is the responsibilities and rights, a review of parliamentary procedure. And I think that one of the things as delegates, you have a responsibility, and being here today present is part of fulfilling that. So you also have rights, and that's what we're going to talk about for both. So our, well, let me make sure if I can. So our objectives today is basically to prepare for the delegate assembly and do it in the framework of parliamentary procedure. So what is parliamentary procedure? Why do we need it? How do we use it? We will be reviewing the Delegate Assembly standing rules, the process and purpose, as Megan already alluded to. There will be questions after that point. And then I want to go into a little more detail on actual parliamentary procedure, learning how to ask the right questions, and applying Robert's Rules of Order. And then there will be more questions, time for questions at the end. So first, what is parliamentary procedure? And it's kind of a funny thing, but this is actually not defined in Roberts. So your parliamentary authority didn't have it. So I needed to go to the internet. And what I found there was that a definition is it's the generally acceptable rules, precedents, and practices commonly employed in governance of deliberate assemblies. Lots of words there, we'll break them down. It's also, these are rules that are intended to maintain decorum, to make sure that the will of the majority is heard, to preserve the rights of the minority, and to facilitate the orderly transaction of business and assembly. So let's look this a little closer. So parliamentary procedure includes rules and a deliberative assembly. First, whose rules? It said generally accepted rules, and these would be your laws. So your national, state, your local laws. It also includes your governing documents, your constitution, bylaws, standing rules, and you need a parliamentary authority for the parts that kind of fall through the cracks. So what's the other parts? MAPE has adopted the Robert's Rules of Order, newly revised, as your parliamentary authority, but there are other parliamentary authorities just in case. The other part is the precedents or practices. These are traditions and customs. And an example of this, I was at a group and I was a parliamentarian and went in August. And one of the questions that came up was, it was the terms of office, and it was that they could only serve for one term. The secretary could only serve one term. The treasurer could have 2 consecutive terms. So the question was whether or not the secretary could only serve one term ever or one term consecutively. You know, they'd have to take a break. And it's really up to interpretation. However, there was a tradition, there was a lady in the room who said, I had a friend and they would not let her be the treasury or secretary again. And so because she had been it once before, and this was years ago, and I will fight this if it is. And so it came down to basically that was their tradition, that was their custom. And so the decision was made. It was one term only. But that's where an example of when you have a question about what the rule is, and it's not easily defined, it's up for interpretation, you can actually look at your tradition or your customs. So the other part to this is, what is a deliberative assembly? So Roberts does define this, and it says it's a group of people that meet to discuss and make decisions on behalf of the entire membership. So it actually is a group that would take action. So it's a board of directors or an executive committee, if authorized in your bylaws, that they can take action on behalf of the membership. But it's definitely your delegate assembly. So your delegate assembly is a deliberative assembly, and you will be meeting to discuss and make decisions on behalf of all of the members of your organization. So let's further look at this. The other definition was that these rules are intended to maintain decorum, and we'll talk a little more about that, to ascertain the will of the majority. So everyone can talk, but it's really comes down to the end, the majority rules. It's to preserve the rights of the minority. Those are things like quorum. And it's to facilitate the orderly transaction of the business of the assembly. We like to talk about civil discourse. This is where the transaction of the business of the assembly is more important and needs to be done in an orderly way. Last year in our PowerPoint, we talked a little about precedents and germane and dilatory, so that we look at those are parliamentary terms, but they're basically to make sure that we are focused on the business and get it done in an orderly way. This is part of the rights and the responsibilities that are in here. The responsibility is that we do have civil discourse, that we can get this done. And so we'll talk a little about that in terms of decorum. And decorum and debate. What this means is that first, the remarks are addressed to the chair, and the chair needs to recognize the delegate before they speak. In most cases, there are some times when you can interrupt, but in decorum, when you're debating, you need to make sure you're being recognized. No side conversations. One person is speaking at a time. And when that happens, this means that the rest of us, or the rest of the delegates, are listening to what is being said and not thinking about what they're going to say. I know that would never happen. Only one motion or item of business at a time, and the discussion needs to be related to the topic or motion at hand. And that's what it kind of means, germane, that you are focused on the motion. You're not talking about other things. The discussion is focused on the item at hand. And last, usually the debate will alternate the pro and con. So it's not just all one-sided. There are some fundamental rules and rights. These are the rights of members, and this actually comes from a different parliamentary authority. It's the American Institute of Parliamentarian Standard Code, but I like the way they kind of group these. And it's the right, you have the right to association, you have the right to assembly, you have a right to meeting, you have the right to this delegate assembly. And everyone has equal rights. It's not like one person has more than one vote. You all have one vote. Again, majority decides, and the asterisk is there. Sometimes it might take 2/3 majority, not just more than half. But the minority do have rights, and we need to at least listen to those rights and acknowledge them. There's the right to discussion. People have a right to speak. There's a right to information. They have a right to know what's going on. And again, the responsibility comes with the fairness and good faith. So being here today, being prepared for this delegate assembly, knowing what your standing rules are and your governing documents, knowing what the resolutions are, doing all your homework ahead is all part of that fairness and good faith. So let's talk about these delegate standing rules. There are actually 5 categories of standing rules, A through E. We're going to just talk mostly today about C, debate. So I'm going through what the debate ones are. The first part under debate is that delegates need to be recognized by the chair. The new parts are that items are going to be first voted on without amendment, but they will be debate. The debate will be for 16 minutes and will be limited 2 minutes per speaker. If the vote is an affirmative on this item, which would be a yes vote, the motion is adopted and there will be no further action. If the motion fails or a no vote, there will be a motion to refer to committee and it will automatically be considered. It'll be considered without amendments except for some of the budget items, and we'll get into that a little later. There will be additional debate on the referral for another 16 minutes with, again, 2 minutes per speaker. If that automatic referral is approved with a yes vote, then there will be an additional 16 minutes. And there is a graphic that will help explain this too. There will be an additional 16 minutes that will help the discussion will be to define the scope and the charges. And if that automatic referral from number 3 fails or a no vote, there will be no further action. So I'm going to keep this slide up for just a minute, but I do have a graphic that kind of helps. So first part will be anything that's presented, all items that are presented for consideration, which will be your resolutions, your expenses, your revenues, your legislative agenda, will be debated without amendment and will be voted yes or no. If it's yes, that motion will be adopted and there's going to be no further action on that. If it fails, it will be automatically referred to a committee and it again will be debated for another 16 minutes. And if that referral is approved, then there will be a third discussion to define the scopes and charges. And if that referral is fails, voted down, no further action will be taken. Your other rules for debate include the chair will instruct the delegates regarding the voting methods and point of order. The motion to call the question, which will stop debate, will only occur after 3 have spoken in favor or 3 against, or unless there's no one else willing to speak. Each speaker will be allowed 2 minutes per time and only once per motion. Non-delegates who wish to speak may speak at the discretion of the chair, and time will halt or the clock will stop. Your 16 minutes will stop for a point of order. Just so you know, as delegates, these standing rules are proposed. They will be voted on. They may be amended before the vote with just a majority vote, but once they are ready in their form, it will require a 2/3 vote. And that includes, we've only a focus on the debate, but there's other ones that are pretty standard to what we've had in the past. So here is kind of this graphic that will show you the standing rules voting procedure. So the item on the floor will be a resolution, agenda. Debate on that item will occur for 16 minutes with a maximum and 2 minutes per person, and then we'll vote. There's no amendments to this. It's basically being voted up or down. If it's a yes vote, the motion's adopted, and that would be the far left corner and side, and there will be no further action. If the vote is a no vote, it will automatically be referred to a committee, and there will be a second debate. Again, the same rules of 16 minutes, 2 minutes per person, and the debate will be on the merits of deferring this to the committee. If there's a yes vote, it goes to the committee for modification. If it's a no vote, the item is dead and it has no merits. The discussion, if it's a yes vote and it goes to the committee, there will be a third opportunity to discuss this for 16 minutes, 2 minutes per person. That would include the instructions to the committee. And I kind of want to just pause at this point for any questions on this, because this is kind of the heart of the standing rules and the changes before we get into the parliamentary procedure part.
Hey, Lucy, this is Suzanne at MAPE Central, and we have a couple of questions coming in to the chat. So I will start with those, and then maybe people can, we can go through the folks that have their hands up. So the first question in the chat was, may a delegate ask for additional time to debate when we are voting on something without amendment?
So the answer is yes.
Oh, you're on mute, Lucy, sorry.
Sorry, I was trying to just move my my bars. Yes. Okay, I'm gonna still, yes. The answer is yes, they may. And we'll talk about that a little more with the proper, of how to extend or limit debates. So there's two ways to do it. One would be for the standing rules before we even adopt them would be to modify them to extend the debate. The second way, which is probably more practical, would be if a particular item is requiring more debate, then you can move to extend the limit of debate. And that will also take a second and a 2/3 vote. So they can request it, but it's really up to the assembly or the organization to approve that request.
Right. There's a couple of questions, which I am now realizing that our standing rules might be unclear about who is on, quote, the committee. And so, Megan, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. So we have a number of board committees. One of them is the finance work group that's presenting the budget. Another is the governance work group. So those are committees of the board. We have the two councils, the political council and the organizing council. So basically what it's saying here on the automatic motion to refer to committee is just a committee in our union that can handle these resolutions after the assembly says we want to do something about it. We're just not sure what yet. So if it's a financial resolution, if it's modifying a financial policy or something related to our finances, it would likely go to the finance work group. If it's something related to the governance of the union, it would likely go to the governance work group.
To follow this train of thought, we have a couple more questions coming in about that. Will the, quote, committee have open meetings where members can have additional input?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That is part of why we want to go into this process or this kind of change in the standing rules and the voting process for delegate assembly. When they go to committee, those committees are open to anyone in our union. Any member can go to those committees. So if one of our resolutions that you care deeply about gets referred to committee, you can go to those committee meetings and have a say in how that resolution or how that topic shapes up. So the short answer is yes, those committees are open to anyone in our union that has an interest in the topic at hand.
Great. The next question is a clarifying question. They say, which they may have missed. Is there a point between item on the floor and debate where people ask questions about the resolution?
It depends on what the question is. If the question is a true point of information or a clarifying point or point of parliamentary inquiry, and we'll talk a little about this in the second part of this, there can be a point of order, a point for information. The clock would stop and you can ask your question. So you have the right to understand what's going on. You have the right to be able to, what are we voting on? What is the discussion? If you use that time to debate the merits, that is not appropriate. So you have, if you use your point of information or your point, anyone can raise that. There's not a limit to it, but you only get one time to debate your 2 minutes per item of motion. So in this case, you really are having 3 different discussions, 3 different debate topics. You will have 3 different opportunities, each person, because in essence, each one of these parts on this graph is a separate motion. So a person could have more than one time to talk about it. But if you use your point of order as another way to try to debate this, that will not be in order. So you have that right to know what's going on. If you're really confused, if there's been so much discussion, you can say, Madam Chair, point of order, what are we talking about? And I mean, I don't think it'll come to that, but I don't know. Did that answer the question?
So Lucy, I want to add on to that we have the resolution forums leading up to delegate assembly, and we have on the day before, we're going to review all of the items that are up for vote on the Saturday of delegate assembly. We are also going to have tabling on Friday where the authors of these resolutions will be available. So I would like to make the assumption that our delegates are coming well informed to the assembly to vote on these things. And like you're saying, Lucy, some things come up or, debate changes your understanding of the resolution. You have a right to that information and you have a right to ask those questions. But I think the expectation is that our delegates are coming to delegate assembly ready to debate and make decisions on these resolutions. Is that fair to say, Lucy?
Yeah, perfect. And that's exactly the responsibility part of that goes with your rights.
Yeah. Okay, there's a couple more questions here, and then we'll get to the hand that's raised as well. Is this a 2/3 vote one way, or if one says no to an item, does it float to the no side automatically?
None of these, okay, the 2/3 vote occurs with the approval of the standing rules originally. Because, and we'll talk again more about this, but whenever you limit your authority to write or extend or change it, so what you're doing is you're saying you can have 16 minutes and you're putting this on. That's why standing rules take a 2/3 vote to approve originally. When you come to these motions, though, your first item on the floor is your resolution, you're debating it. I'm looking at the top of this graphic where you would vote yes or you vote no, and the motion is adopted or it's not. That's only a majority vote. So for each one of these 3 votes that are on the resolution or the agenda or the budget or the expenses or the revenues, those are majority votes. Just each time. But the 2/3 is only in the beginning. So if you didn't like a standing rule, you can amend it, but they're usually pretty much voted up or down. Does that, I'm not sure if I understand it correctly.
Oh, I think that makes sense. Okay, so when do those follow-up votes happen after something has gone to committee?
It depends on what the thing is. So our Constitution outlines where authority lies for the different governing bodies in our union. The delegate assembly is the only body that can modify the Constitution and the elections rules. And so if there is a resolution that gets referred to a committee, that modifies the elections rules or the Constitution, it would need to come back to delegate assembly for a decision. If it is a resolution that modifies a bylaw or a policy, the board can make that decision on it once it's gone through committee and it's ready for a decision. Great.
Okay, we're gonna do a couple more of these, and then we'll get to Michael. If the resolution goes to a committee for modification, is it expected that the committee will meet during the current delegate assembly and change the proposal for consideration again at this delegate assembly, or will it be carried over to next year?
We will not expect that the committee will meet during delegate assembly to take these up. It will be kind of tabled for the committee to take up at their next meeting. It might take them a couple of times to get through the resolution. Then it will either be moved by the board with the recommendation of the committee, or we will come back to delegate assembly to make that decision. We do have the ability to call additional delegate assemblies if we need to or want to, so.
Okay, and if there are more delegates who want to debate a resolution than there would be time for, how are the speakers selected?
The first part to that would be if you come close to your 16 minutes and you feel there's more time needed to debate, you would move to extend the limits of debate for 10 minutes or pick more speakers, whatever you desire at that time. And again, that would then need a second, and it would take a 2/3 vote to approve. And for that particular debate, the 16 minutes would be extended. How they're chosen, I'm not quite sure that's been determined yet. Normally, it might be who's at the microphone. Again, it would be if they've spoken already, then they wouldn't have a chance to speak again, even with the extended limits. So it'd have to be someone who is speaking for the first time, and usually they're chosen to be pro and con. So you would alternate. If you find that everybody is speaking in favor or everybody is speaking against, you might want at that point to stop the debate.
Great. I thank you for your patience. Mike, turn you.
Excuse me. My question is, at last year's delegate assembly, toward the end of the day, there was a motion that was made, and the first person that was called on after the motion was made called the question. So we had no debate and no questions because the calling of the question takes precedence over everything. What recourse do we have as delegates when an important subject comes up? When you said that there's a minority and a majority, you should be able to discuss it. And granted, the assembly may say, yep, call the question, but you as the parliamentary procedure that you had up, stating that once that there is a motion made, there's a minimum of 3 and 3. Is that correct or not?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead,
Yeah.
Megan.
Well, we did have that, I don't know if it's a problem. Robert's Rules of Order does allow for motions to call the question, and they do take precedent. And so that was the process that we followed last year because that's what's outlined in Robert's Rules of Order. This time, though, I talked with the board about that at our last couple of meetings, and what we decided was to add a provision in the standing rules that motions to call the question will only be accepted after we've had at least 3 speakers in favor and 3 speakers opposed. Once we've had that, someone can make a motion to call the question, and then it does take precedence again. But if someone makes a motion to call the question and we've only had one speaker or we've had no speakers, I'll call it out of order.
So that is not a Roberts rule. The question be called anytime. We're just modifying Roberts rules. Is
Right.
that a
So
correct statement?
when you adopt these rules, these are being adopted for a one-time only your delegate assembly. And your rules that you adopt will take precedence over Robert's rules. So if you didn't have a rule, then you rely on Robert, but you have your rules are more important than what Robert's are.
And I guess my question is Roberts, is there a fail-safe in there by default that allows or that would prevent a question to be called immediately after a motion, or is there not?
No, there's
Okay.
not.
Okay, thanks. That answered my question. Thanks. Sorry for the follow-up.
No worries. I think too, the point here is that it takes a 2/3 vote. So if you don't want debate to stop, you would vote against that. Okay, there will be time at the end too for more questions, but I'm just going to continue on this part. Let me see if I can go on here. So that was questions. So this is kind of shocker. I was actually again in September, I was at a meeting and I found this very interesting. But guess what? Ordinary people do not want to be parliamentarians. It was kind of at a parliamentary group and we were all like, really? Are you kidding me? It's fun. But if you had 100 people, this was some research that this man was presenting. If you had 100 people at an assembly, only about 95 will vote. There are going to be 5% of the people who just aren't going to vote. About 20% or 20 would speak, and only 5 will make motions. So when you think of all of our emphasis that we put on parliamentary procedure, and yet, and really when it comes down to it, it's very few who actually do it. So why is that? And what this man was, he kind of talked about is that really what we need to be talking about is how to ask questions and what questions to ask in order to increase our participation at events such as this delegate assembly. So the first question is, what is it that you want to know? What is it you want to know or do? And then what would you say to do that? So for example, yes?
Do we need to advance your slides because we're still seeing the standing rules?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, it says my sharing is paused. Oops, here. Let me try this and then reshare. Okay. Do you see them now?
Yep, there you go. What how to ask questions and what question to ask.
Yeah, let me see if I can go. I don't oops.
We lost you again.
Okay, I'm gonna go back to here. I'm gonna share this, but let me go back to here. Share from current slide. There. Well, you'll get it. So the research was that some people don't like questions. I don't know how. That was a cute graphic. This is my shocker. So most people don't want to be parliamentarians. 100 people at an assembly, 95 will vote, 20 will speak, and 5 will make motions. So it comes down to how to ask questions and what questions to ask. So what do you want to know or do? And what would you say? So if you want to know what's going on or what is the motion or where we're at in this procedure, you would ask a request for information or you'd have a parliamentary query. What if you want to know, did the chair get it right? You could appeal the decision of the chair. Was the vote right? And you could call for division. We're going to go into these a little more detail, but I'm just showing these originally. What if you wanted to divide a motion into 2 parts? You would ask for division of the question or the motion. And what if you really don't want to discuss this motion at all? You could object to consideration of a question, or you could postpone indefinitely. So let's go to the details. So the request for information or a parliamentary inquiry, a point of order, or to raise a question of privilege, a delegate can interrupt. So this is the time when you would not have to be recognized by the chair. You do not need a second, but the chair rules. The chair would give you, they would give you an answer. If you didn't like that answer, you could appeal the decision of the chair. And this is where, again, the delegate would interrupt, you'd say, I appeal the decision of the chair, but it does require a second and it can be debated. The rules for debate on this one are a little different in that the chair can speak twice. They get to speak at first and they get to speak last, but a member can only speak once. And you can only speak once anyways, but Roberts does allow 2 times. So this would be a little different on how, but the chair does get to be the first speaker and they get to be the last. They basically explain why they made that ruling. Division. This is division of an assembly. So the delegate would interrupt if they didn't think the vote was correct. Again, no second is needed. The chair would take a rising vote. It doesn't have to be counted. It just has to be a different way. And sometimes in a large group, raising hands is also more difficult, but that would work. It has to be a second kind of vote. Roberts is the one who says a rising vote or a standing vote. Sometimes the raising of the hands also works. If you wanted it to be a counted vote or a roll call, that would need a motion. You would move, it would have to be seconded, and you can debate that. But division, you can interrupt, no seconds needed, and the chair needs to take a second vote. Division of a question is a little different. This again would be where the delegate would make a motion to separate a pending motion into 2 parts, and a second is required. The other part that we would talk about is what if you wanted to object to the consideration of the question? And we have seen this happen. So to do that, if you really didn't want this to be discussed at all, you have to raise this objection before any debate has begun or any other kind of motion has been stated. So you would say, Madam Chair, I object to consideration of the question or the resolution or whatever the issue is. And the chair would then take a vote and say that the consideration of the question is objected to. Shall the question be considered? And this is a case where it's a little different, and that's why I just want to spend a little more time. So again, a second is not needed. The objection is not debatable or amendable. The delegate would say, I object to the consideration of the question. The chair would say, the consideration of the question has been objected to, and would proceed to a vote. It requires a 2/3 vote in the negative. And so the chair would then say, shall the question be considered? Shall this motion be considered? Shall the resolution be considered? Whatever it is. Those in favor of considering it, please rise or raise your hand, some way to indicate more than just a voice vote. You wouldn't do a voice vote when you're trying to do 2/3. And then those opposed, rise or raise your hand. And then be seated. There are 2/3 opposed and the question will not be considered, or there are less than 2/3 opposed and the objection is not sustained. The question is on the resolution. And that sounds like a lot of detail. And your chair she will have this scripted, she will know how to say it. But basically, it's one of these things that if you want the question to be debated, then you want it to be considered, you vote in favor of it. And it's not just a majority vote, it's the negative. This is the case where negative votes really count. 2/3 negative would have to be in order for it not to be considered. So it's a lot of work with that one, but it has been used before. The other motion.
If they want to object to the consideration of the question, they would need to interrupt and kind of yell that out like a point of order, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it would be in that is one that you can interrupt. Let me just, you can interrupt that one. And you have to do it before any discussion happens. So right after it's being said. Postpone indefinitely is a little different. It's actually a motion. It does require a second, and it is debatable, but it's not amendable. So you can debate the merits of postponing indefinitely, and that can occur even after debate has begun, but before any further, like if before the motion gets amended. But so the objection to consideration of the question has to occur right away. Postpone indefinitely could occur a little later. Not sure, I'm just pointing these out. So that does require a majority vote to pass. So not the 2/3 and the negative and all that other stuff. So let's talk a little about how to amend a motion. If you are looking to amend for any reason, there are 3 ways basically: to strike out, to insert, or to strike out and insert, and that would be in the same place. Amending motions, you do need a second, and it can be debated, and a majority vote is necessary for approval. Not all motions can be amended. For example, previous question, there's some that just cannot be amended. And at most, only 2 amendments are allowed at a time, a primary and a secondary. And this actually happened last year. I've got some examples of what kind of happened last year because it was a very exciting year from my point of view. There was actually a motion to strike out the strikeout. So there was a main motion was being considered. An amendment was made to strike out some words. While that motion was pending, an amendment to strike out the strikeout was made, which is a secondary amendment and which is acceptable. And the result was this was approved, and the result was that left the original wording in place. So if you have a motion to strike out, and then you have another motion to strike out the strikeout, you're back to the original. Then you're still considering this motion. There was another amendment to the original wording, which was proposed, and that amendment was approved. And finally, the main motion as amended was adopted. So it was pretty exciting. You don't often see that happening, but that happened last year. We talked a little about calling the question or extending debate. And so these are motions that affect the rights of others, such as the right to debate, and they do require a 2/3 vote. So the previous question, it requires, it's a motion, it requires a second, it is not amendable or debatable, and it needs a 2/3 vote to pass. What that does is it stops debate and a vote is taken immediately. And when you make this motion, you do need to clarify, particularly if there's an amendment already on the floor, like you have a motion and you've already you're discussing the amendment, you need to clarify when you stop debate that it's on everything. So is it just the amendment or is it the whole motion? And sometimes the wording is like this: I move the previous question on all pending questions, all pending motions, which means that includes any kind of amendments or main motions that are being considered. When that happens, you would first immediately take the vote on the amendment, and then you would take the vote on the motion. You don't get to re-amend it, so it's one of those things. Another way to do that is that the chair might seek unanimous consent in ending debate. So if rather than go through the whole 2/3 vote and going through this, the chair might just see that you have this rule in there that you have three in favor and 3 against, and say there's only 2 people who are up speaking and it looks like the debate is ending. It's something that's not very controversial. Rather than having someone call the question, the chair could say something like, is there any objection to closing debate? And then if none, you wouldn't need the 3. Then if there's no objection, the debate would just end. It would close. So it's another way of closing debate. You don't have to have a motion to close debate. You can just say, is there any objection? The other part to this is to limit or extend the limits of debate. Again, it's a motion. It requires a second, This one is amendable, but it's not debatable. So for example, if you were moving to extend the debate for another 20 minutes, you could have an amendment to strike 20 and insert 10 and then only have it for 10. But you don't debate that. You just vote it up or down. So you can, it's a little different. You can do this. Some of this stuff is I want to just state that this is the job of the chair to know what these are. And this is why you might want to have a parliamentarian with you on some of these, but to know what your 2/3 vote is, what's debatable, what's not. I have some, and I was talking with Megan earlier. I don't know if you can see this, these goldenrod sheets, wherever, that I will bring that will have some, they have the charts on them, and people there, I have like 100 of them. The people can take them if they desire to have it. But the chair is also a facilitator, and it's the role of the chair to make sure that people are on the right path, that it's in order. These are items that are in order. So is this appropriate? Should this be amendable? Things like that. And so just know that it's not necessarily you can ask the chair for clarification, for help, but it's also the role of the chair to understand and know what's in order and what's not. My last slide is that I just found this kind of interesting. I actually took notes after last year. If you were at the delegate assembly last year, you would have heard these are the following motions. I mentioned there were a couple amendments. There was a strikeout and insert, and there was, like I mentioned, the strikeout. There was a division of the question. There was a call the question. There was division of the assembly. There was a refer to the committee. And there was an adjournment while business was pending. And that's actually a motion. Sometimes if you can just move to adjourn if there's nothing pending. But when business is pending, it goes to vote, and that vote failed. So I do think you guys are very sophisticated in your use of parliamentary procedure and very knowledgeable. But I thought that's kind of fun. And that's actually it. That's the end of that I have. So I'm going to stop sharing. If there are any further questions?
That was great, Lucy. Thank you so much. I think there are some questions that Suzanne will run through, but thank you for going over that and helping us make sense of it. And thank you for being next to me at Delegate Assembly to help make sense of it then. Because it comes fast, and it gets crazy at DA. So I appreciate you being there.
Okay, well, there's a few questions in our Q&As, and I have a couple in our chat as well. This one says, this is silly, but how do we actually vote? Is it like hand raising or push a button? First time delegate here, obviously. So not obvious. That's a great question. We don't know.
There are several options. Within Robert's Rules of Order, Lucy, if I get this wrong, I trust that you will correct me here, but we can do a voice vote. We can do a standing vote. We can do hands raised. There's also roll call, where I can just read through the list of delegates and you tell me yes or no how you vote, and our somebody at the head table will record it for us. In years past, we have used a clicker, where you can register your vote on the clicker. We are still exploring how all of those will happen, but I think last year we never got to the point of using a roll call vote where we go through the list of delegates and you call out your vote. We used hands raised or voice votes for everything, but any of those could be used at the assembly. Is that right, Lucy?
Yep. Yes, Megan, you're exactly correct. And I would say that the easiest way is to do a voice vote. So what happens is you do a voice vote. The chair will announce the vote. So if you think the chair got it right, if it's overwhelmingly all in favor and there's far more yeses than there are no's, and the chair declares that the motion passed, then that's no problem. But if for some reason you feel like there are just louder people on one side than the other, And if the chair, there's could be two things. So number one, the chair might not be sure. So if the chair can ask, okay, let's do a raise your hand would be your next one, or a standing vote so that you don't have to count it yet. But the chair can order that vote. You as a delegate can also order that vote by calling division. So if the chair says there are more in favor, the motion carries, and you think that that wasn't really true, then you can say division. You just shout it out, division, and it has to be taken a second way. If there seems to be an overwhelming amount in favor and very few, and you call division, we actually call that dilatory. It means it's just kind of delaying this, and you don't want to go down there. So only if you're really not sure. You're not really sure that that vote was clear.
Another question was, will we have this language as a cheat sheet in person? Yes, Lucy has a Robert's rules that she held up that we will make sure that we have available to folks. And the standing rules with the graphic will be added to the portal as soon as they are completed. We just haven't gone through all of the documentation. We want to make sure it's accurate before we post it to the portal. Okay. Another question from someone, and this is in the Q&A, are resolutions and motions the same thing?
Yes. Resolutions are longer motions, and so they're usually written out, but it's basically the bottom part of a motion is, you know, I move adoption of this resolution. So they are the same.
The next one is, isn't it out of order for any of the resolutions to be contested by objecting to the consideration of the question, since the executive committee already objected to all of the resolutions previously?
So Lucy, we have a provision in our bylaws that in the process of preparing for the delegate assembly allows any member of the executive committee to object to the consideration of the question of a resolution that does not modify our governing documents, which are bylaws and constitution and elections rules. Those are 5 out of the 6 resolutions for delegate assembly this year. So the executive committee did go through that process. They were appealed successfully at the board of directors, so they are going to the delegate assembly. So that's just some context for you to answer that question, if you will, please.
And this kind of goes back to that deliberate assembly. The delegate assembly can make decisions for the membership. So if they have that right to object to the consideration of a question, they are, in this situation, they have a greater authority than just the board or the executive committee. So it is, I mean, it could be made. Again, it's up to the members, it's up to the assembly. Whether or not, if there's 2/3 who do not want this considered, which is a large number, then it won't be considered, but it's an option.
Great. The next one is, can you repeat what the requirements are to modify the standing rules at the start of DA?
You would make a motion to amend, and that would be, you would either, most likely you're going to strike out and insert. So you would strike out, if you're looking at time, for example, that's easier. So you wanted to strike out 16 minutes and insert 20. Or you want to strike out that you can only speak once and insert twice. It's that you would have a motion, you need a second, and it would go under the amendment part. If you wanted to strike out the whole motion, that would be a strikeout. So your 3 ways are to insert, strike out, or strike out and insert.
I have only two more questions. Hopefully we can get both of them. Do delegates have to make a motion to amend the main motion right away? Or can they motion to amend after some debate of the main motion has already taken place?
Yes, you can do both. You can amend it right away, or you can wait till after discussion has occurred. In the order going up, if for some reason the motion were referred to a committee, you couldn't at that point. But as long as the main motion is still on the floor and that's it, you can amend it. You can amend it at any point and any time. So after discussion, so the second part works.
Great. And then my last question that I have is how many delegates are there this year? And Liz tells me there are 189. And that would be all of the delegates on the floor. That includes the board of directors who are seated as delegates at delegate assembly. Those are also the local presidents. In their capacity as local president, our bylaws say that they serve as delegates to DA as well. I think those are all the constitutional folks that are represented in the 189 that we have. They do not vote as delegates. Yes. Liz's question was, what about the trustees? And the trustees do not vote as delegates. They can serve as alternates if they chose to and if we're needed to, but they are not seated delegates at the DA.
But we love them and we enjoy cheering for them when they come.
They will be there to tell us, yeah, exactly how many people will be there and what a quorum is and everything. The last one is what do the alternates do? They are there in case the delegate is not able to serve. Yeah. Be informed. Those are all my questions that I have.
Great.
If folks have additional questions, they should feel free to reach out to me or Suzanne or Lucy. I don't think we have major contact information available, but if folks want to reach out to me, I'd be happy to put you in contact with Lucy or forward your question over to her.
Perfect.
And thank you so much, Lucy, again. Lucy just got back from a long European vacation and she came directly here to tell us how to do Robert's Rules of Order. So I appreciate that you're here because Robert's Rules of Order are very confusing if you've not done it before, or even if you have done it before. Robert's rules are very confusing for folks and somewhat difficult to navigate. So, but it is how we can get 189 people to try to talk about the same thing. So thank you, Lucy.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.